Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of Law That Leads. In this episode, we're going to be discussing our immigration practice here at ALF LLP. And with me today, I have Johana Mehmetaj, who is our in-house immigration specialist. Johana is a regulated Canadian immigration consultant with the College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants. For 8 years now, she has been practicing immigration and refugee law, specializing in temporary and permanent residence applications, including study and work permits, OINP, express entry, and more importantly, Johana also routinely represents refugee claimants at the Immigration and Refugee Board. As you can imagine, Johana's purpose is to provide the most professional and efficient representation to her clients, and I am very glad that Johana is here today to answer some of the most frequently asked questions she typically receives from clients or potential clients. Without further ado, let's welcome Johana. Hi, Johana.
Hi, Paula.
I am your host. My name is Paula Becci. I am a partner here at ALF LLP, which is a full-service firm and practices a number of areas of law. We are here at the headquarters of ALF LLP, where we will be joined by industry professionals each month to discuss cutting-edge legal insights and in-depth discussions all related to law. Whether you are a seasoned lawyer, a business owner, a student, or simply curious about the law, our podcast is designed to equip you with invaluable insights and actionable knowledge on emerging legal trends and real-world scenarios. So let's dive in. Johana, the first question we have, which I assume is probably going to be the one you get most, if someone comes to you and says, I am in Canada as a visitor, and how long can I extend my status for? What would typically be your advice?
All right. So if somebody came in Canada as a visitor, whether they came in on an ETA, also known as an electronic travel authorization, or a temporary resident visa, which is a visa on their passport, eligible to stay in Canada up to 6 months. Once that 6 months comes along, they should be extending their status as visitors in Canada. They can extend their status for an additional 6 months, and I've also had situations where I've even requested for an additional year. You definitely need to show the reason and purpose of why you want to stay here for so long, but you definitely do have that option as a visitor to extend your status in Canada.
Wow, that's actually great to know. I have heard of the 6 months before, but I've never heard of it being extended further than that, as you mentioned. So in that case, what type of documents would someone need to provide in order to get that extended period of time on top of the 6 months?
All right, so an example can be, let's say here you're visiting your parents, right? Or your child. You can definitely provide a letter of invitation requesting for those additional 6 months. And the purpose could always be either you want to stay longer for a birthday, Christmas, New Year, so like an event, right? Or another great reason that I've used personally for many clients is they just fell in love with Toronto and they want to travel around Canada. So maybe go to Montreal, Quebec, or something like that. And letter of invitation, for sure, bank statement. You do have to show that you can continue to afford your stay here. You can also show that you haven't quit your job back home as well. You can use a reference letter, right? So the whole purpose is the officer needs to be secure that you're still staying here for your residence reasons, right? So the more documents you can prove that, the better.
I guess the other part to visitors is also international students, which recently has been a lot of discussion around that topic. International student is here in Canada and says to you, can I legally work during this time? And if so, will that Canadian experience be counted towards their permanent residency when it comes time for them to apply?
So that's a question I get often as well. International students in the last 2 years has expanded crazy. So a lot of people want to know, can they work? What experience will count towards PR? So here's the simple answer. If you're here as an international student, you're here on a study permit, You can legally work. Please make sure that you review your study permit. There are conditions and remarks on that study permit that state you are eligible to work on or off campus. If you do not see that statement, that means you cannot legally work and you would have to do an amendment application. So you can legally work up to 20 hours per week, and during the period of, let's say, your summer break, work full time. Does that experience that you gain as a student count towards PR? Unfortunately, no. So any experience you do while as a student will not count towards PR. Nevertheless, though, I highly recommend to gain any kind of work experience while as a student, even customer service. It's important to show that you are integrating into the labor market in Canada.
Speaking of working while here as an international student, I guess the next sub question, or I guess the next logical question to ask is, can someone operate or even commence or register their own business while on a work permit?
All right. So here's the answer. If you are inside Canada on an open work permit, meaning there are no conditions on which employer you can work with, no conditions on how many hours a week you can work, you are eligible to actually register your own business. You can either register for a sole proprietorship or you can incorporate. Always remember that will be to the duration of the expiry of your open work permit. On the other hand, if you are inside Canada on a closed work permit, also known as an employer-specific work permit, unfortunately, you're not eligible. The reason for that being is that a closed work permit, there's two things on that. Closed work permits are issued to Canadian employers that have received a valid labor market impact assessment, and that closed work permit also has what's called a national occupation classification, which is the code and occupation in which you are only eligible to work in. So simple answer, open work permit, you can register your own business till the duration of the validity of that permit. On a closed work permit, unfortunately, no. You can only do so once you gain permanent residency.
Wow. Labor market impact assessment applications. I haven't heard it be spelled out in a very long time because I'm so used to hearing LMIAs. And for those of you that are just tuning in and don't know, I actually have a past in immigration. I did a lot of immigration work during my time in Australia. And also, I worked for the Ontario government under the business immigration branch. So LMIA is a word you hear often. But for those of you that have never heard it before, Johana, tell us, what does it mean?
Okay, so the definition by IRCC is a labor market impact assessment, also known as an LMIA, or some of my clients like to say LIMA, is a document that an employer in Canada will need to get before hiring a foreign worker. So majority of Canadian employers need an LMIA. How an LMIA works is the employer has to do 1 month to 2 months of advertisements. The job offer that they've given you, they need to put that out in employment websites or agencies, giving an opportunity for Canadian citizens or permanent residents to apply for the job. Once that 1 month or 2 month comes up and they haven't found any citizens or permanent residents who qualified, then that job offer would go to the foreign worker. So in many, many instances, many Canadian employers need an LMIA. And once you get an LMIA, that is what will make you eligible to apply for an open work permit. Again, that LMIA is approved, then you can apply for a work permit. The work permit will be closed. It will be employer specific only for that Canadian employer and only for you to work in that designated occupation.
Oh my God, the occupations. I remember this too. In Australia, we had something called NOC. Does that exist here in Canada as well, I assume?
Yes. So NOC stands for National Occupation Classification. And basically, it's Canada's national system for describing occupations. So you can actually go to the NOC website and you can search the NOC to find the occupation, how it's classified. And from that classification, you can see duties, the educational requirements, or any other useful information. For instance, if you are applying for a carpenter, and you go check out that knock, there will be a 5 digit code. And then you will see typically what do carpenters do in their responsibilities. And also you'll have there the educational requirements. So mainly they would need a high school diploma, or they would need a 3 or 4 year of apprenticeship, or basically many times they just want you to have, let's say, 3 to 4 or even 5 years of experience in order for you to qualify as a carpenter here in Canada.
I assume that when someone comes to you for advice and you're covering all the aspects you've covered for us here today, and someone is specialized in a certain occupation, I assume that there's also some sort of a beginning salary or a standardized wage that would be for each occupation that exists in Canada as well?
Yes, that is correct, Paula. So this actually all links together. So National Occupation Classification, LMIA, and then we have what's called the median wage. The median wage, you can actually find that on the National Job Bank. And the way that NOC and the median wage are connected is because of the occupation and the NOC code. That's how you can find your median wage. So the median wage always depends on the occupation, the city, and the province. So for instance, in the province of Ontario and in the city of Toronto, the occupation, let's say office assistant, is at a wage of $21.43. But in Winnipeg, Manitoba, the wage is $20. The median wage is very important for LMIA applications because this is the determining factors on your hourly wage and yearly salary. So this is what employers, and also for an LMIA application, this is the median wage that they would be referring to. And it's also really good to see what are the hourly wages and standards for each province and city, just to make sure that you're being paid what you're supposed to.
Wow, this conversation is actually hitting home for me. I am starting to think about my own journey as to how I became to practice law here in Canada. But reality is, I was licensed in Australia to practice law. I was admitted to the Supreme Court of Queensland as a solicitor first there. Then, when I came to Canada, I still had to go through this very lengthy and very excruciating process in order to also become licensed here in Canada. And I assume a lot of your clients would be in the same position. I guess they would be licensed from a different country, have a whole career there, and now they're in a position where they're moving here in Canada and they're trying to figure out where they go next. I mean, I'm only familiar with the legal side of things, but I assume it exists in other professions as well. So how does that play or how does that come into play with NOC and LMIAs and all of that?
Great question here. So this is really important because I do meet clients who are pharmacists back home, or they're a lawyer, or they're a teacher, or they're an architect. Okay. So in Canada, we have what's called regulatory bodies. Okay. So for instance, let's take an engineer. There's the Professional Engineers of Ontario. That regulatory body has a step-by-step of what you need to do in order to get your license in Ontario. And the first one is always that you need to get what's called an Educational Credential Evaluation, also known as an ECE. Canada recognizes only 5. So one of them is World Education Services.
Oh, okay.
WES, and you would have to go through the process with WES, depending on the country where you're from. And they would evaluate your diplomas and state that your diploma from, your country of citizenship is equivalent to, let's say, a master's degree or diploma here in Canada. Once you get that, that's when you can start also the process of converting your education. ECE is really important because once you come to Canada, you can't become a lawyer directly. You can't start to become a pharmacist. You really have to connect with the regulatory bodies and, start the process of converting your education and the proper licensing here in the province of Ontario. Also note, each province has different processes and their own system. So depending on the province you go to, it's really important for you to follow up with that regulatory body.
Be able to go through I'm assuming EC is the Education credential evaluation process.
Correct.
Would you recommend that, because I assume it takes so long? For me, it took nearly 2 years. So
Okay.
I don't know if it would be the same for other careers.
It's not the same. So education credential evaluation would be you connecting, let's say, with World Education Services, and they would evaluate all of your educational documents. But then connecting with a regulatory body, that's completely separate. So maybe they would want an English exam. They'd probably want reference letters. They'd want to see your ECE and the evaluation. And obviously, they will ask for you to do a licensing exam as well, right? So they have their own, it's 2 separate processes, ECE and then connecting with the regulatory body.
So I assume you get questions all the time, maybe sometimes from overseas. Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, do you recommend to some or all that they should begin this process prior to arriving to Canada?
For sure. So this is a loaded question because there's so many different answers. So for instance, I'll just give some examples. If you're applying for express entry under the federal skilled worker, you just need to evaluate your diplomas, okay? But when you come here and you want to work again in that field, let's say as a teacher, pharmacist, engineer, lawyer, then you definitely have to connect with the regulatory bodies in order to get that licensing. I'd also like to add, because I also deal with Canadian employers, in the province of Ontario, there are 22 compulsory trades. So for instance, if you come in Canada as a plumber, come in the province of Ontario as a plumber, and you come here and you work 2 years and you don't get your trade license in the province of Ontario as a plumber, that work experience will not count towards permanent residency, right? So it's really important that when you are in a licensed trade, licensed occupation, and you come to Canada on a work permit, it's essential that you do everything you can in order to get that licensing. It will impact your permanent residency.
Wow, I think that is perfect for others to know. I certainly didn't, and I think it's an important point.
For professional ethics, it's my duty to always tell clients that for sure you can apply in this program or for this occupation, but please make them aware that it is a trade or occupation that requires licensing, and they need to be prepared when they come here to do everything they can to get it.
This is why everybody needs to hire Johana, because she knows what she's doing. And, you know, in this firm, we definitely pride ourselves in our professionalism, number one. But I think we take a very innovative and different approach to how we advise our clients. We always go above and beyond, and we will always sort of talk about the unspoken rules that, you know, sometimes people might not be aware of. It's not an indication of how smart you are or what you know and what you don't know, but it truly is. Something might be common sense for others.
Exactly.
Sometimes it's a cultural norm here that it might not be overseas into a different country. Cultural differences are very, very crucial. And even though we're talking mostly procedurally, I think there really should be a guide and a book on cultural differences when people move here. Don't you think so?
I agree. And I can talk, you know, for myself growing up in Canada. You know, I grew up here with the education system here. I had Canadian friends. And when I say Canadian friends, multicultural friendships. And it's only when I started to work in this industry that I would go back home in Albania. Mm-hmm. And that's when I would start to see a lot of those cultural differences between myself growing up here and other Albanians
that hadn't grown up here.
that hadn't grown up here. And many times I would always think, I don't know how well suited, promoted, or told to many people the shock of when you come here. Not only like from a language barrier, like that's already a first, right?
Exactly.
But just from the fact that you will be interacting and working with people all over the world, different mindsets, different religions. People are not going to always agree with you. Employers can be good, can be bad. And a big thing of, you know, my experience and when I've talked to other, clients, let's say, is just talking about how networking is so important because they have that image of when you come to Canada, it's a fair country. You're going to find a job if you qualify for it. And I'm like, I grew up here. I did my whole entire education here. If there is somebody that deserves a job, I would say it would be me. And I had to fight for a job when I finished university. I was 1 year unemployed. I couldn't believe it. A lot of things that are unspoken.
I I wholeheartedly agree with you. And of course, I think my own experience of not being born and raised here has definitely shaped that. And you know what I find? Whenever I'm here, I don't feel as Canadian. I say, my roots, I'm born somewhere else. My roots are from somewhere else. Everyone, all my friends, all my family, they were not born here, even though we've been here forever. And then I go to other countries. While I'm there, I realize how truly Canadian I actually am.
That is correct.
I think it's one of those things that unless you experience it for yourself, you can't really explain it to someone else. And also that other person that you're explaining it to, unless they've been through the same thing,
Yeah.
they won't fully understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I think that exists in across cultures, regardless of what country you're from and you're coming here. But then you also have this inner battle where, a little bit of identity crisis that I think no one ever talks about, that it's part of the process when you're, regardless of what country you're from and regardless of what country you move to, it's sort of like a rite of passage.
And all of a sudden, when people start to take your kindness or professionalism as weakness, I just couldn't believe it. So you have to start to learn to adapt to where you're at. Or yeah, there's a lot of things, right? So then when you come here, since I was away for 3 years, I had to relearn how to be back in Canada, which was crazy.
Yeah.
I thought I would integrate immediately. It was not. I suffered actually for almost a year having such a different lifestyle in Albania and then coming here, which also opened my eyes to the first time in my life, cultural differences, right? So,
Yes.
and this is something I speak with to clients where I want to, first of all, there's nothing you can prepare anybody for, but it's something that it is important to let people know the differences that they should be expecting and perhaps have a bit of a more open mind.
Tune in, everyone. We're about to develop a guide on this. So, subscribe now and save the 17th of each month for new episodes of Law That Leads, along with our growing community. In the interim, connect with us on social media for updates and exclusive content. You can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook at ALF LLP. You may also listen to us on Spotify, and if you are like me, who loves to listen to podcasts on my long drives, please tune in and, more importantly, drive safe.